You know, for years and years, we've been hearing the problem with the trade deficit. And the more you hear, the bigger it gets worse and worse and worse. And what are we going to do to try to solve this problem? Even if you're one way, what can you do to help the rest? I'd like to hear that from you.
Well, what we have to do is get a lot tougher with our so-called trading partner. China, John, is Exhibit A. When China came up several years ago and wanted into the WTO, the World Trade Organization, I was opposed to it. Only 15 senators opposed admitting China to the World Trade Organization. And why did I do it? Because I didn't trust them. Well, they have made promises to us to get into the World Trade Organization. And right now, I'm working on legislation to rescind our obligation, since they're not letting us into their markets. What we have to have is reciprocity. If they're going to trade with us, we have to be able to sell goods to them. The imbalance comes because their markets are closed and they flood our markets with dumped and subsidized goods. And it leads to a lot of other problems. It leads to their mistreating Tibet and our being unable to deal with human rights. It leads to their holding up on sanctions against Iran, which threatens world peace. It's unacceptable for Iran to have the nuclear weapon. And everybody's ready to go now, including Russia, and China isn't. And our president goes to China, and he goes with his hat in his hand. Because what has happened, they've engaged in what I called on the Senate floor international banditry. International banditry. They take our money by violating our trade laws, subsidizing the goods, taking our money, lending it back to us, practically own America, and we're powerless. And all of that is because of the trade imbalance. So I would start with enforcing the trade laws, and I would shut our markets to China. I'd get really tough with them. Let them see how they will do if they don't have U.S. markets.
What are your plans? I mean, what do you plan to do to help this situation?
In trade, specifically trade.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think any trade bill that comes forward has to have the ILO 7 agreements have to be ensconced. And enforceable, International Labor Organizations have to, thank you, have to be part of any trade agreement with an enforceable mechanism. They also have to have those 5 key environmental agreements that have to be part of any one. When I went down to the AFL-CIO, after I got elected, I met with the legislative branch of the AFL-CIO in Washington, D.C. They said the Jordanian trade agreement in 1999 was a decent one, but with no teeth in it. And so as long as you have those types of agreements in it, but with enforcement, then those should be good, fair trade bills. Second, we have to, as this president has begun to do, and the previous 8 years it was not done at all, enforce those who violate it, like China on the tires, China on the steel imports. And you're familiar with both of those very much of yours. And I wrote letters to support those. The currency exchange has a lot to do to step off from the free trade, of having China more than just jawboning them, but really pressuring them so that they do not unfairly subsidize the currency exchange out there. At the same time, though, I do believe that we need a greater bargain with our workers. We worked hard that if, as you know, someone is laid off because of a trade agreement, that there is an obligation from the federal government for so many weeks of training. Out of our committee, we increased that number of weeks, but that's not sufficient. If somehow there is this disruption, we have to have it so that we actually train them for a higher quality type of job. In Pennsylvania, if I could, for an example, in Philadelphia shipyard, we are importing 180 welders from outside Pennsylvania because we do not, they could not, after training 150, 200 welders, find the quality welders they needed to do the job in Pennsylvania. I went to Delaware County Community College, you trained them, you couldn't get them from the high schools. They either didn't want to or didn't have the skills, because it's not like when I had them in the Navy, you flipped your helmet, lit the arc, laid the bead. You literally have to sit at a computer and have a higher level of science and math. That's why our education, as I said earlier, is so vital. I've taken 45 companies led by Akron Shipyard in Philadelphia into 4 school districts where they're now mentoring what we call the BEST program in our district, and having the kids understand why you need a higher level of science and math to do the great artisan work that made our manufacturing be such a power in this nation. So we've got stuff to do here at home also.